I never thought that at 44, I'd find myself sleeping with a girl 20 years younger. And I certainly didn't expect it to be out of revenge. But that's life for you. Just when you think you've seen it all, it throws a brutal curveball your way. A gut-wrenching, heart-shattering curveball. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name's Ethan. I'm a middle-aged, average guy. Nothing particularly remarkable about me. Or at least, there wasn't until my life turned upside down. I've been married to Laura for 16 years. We met in our late 20s, back when I was more optimistic and had fewer gray hairs. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room and make anyone feel special. And to be honest, I fell for it. I felt like the luckiest guy in the world to be with her. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it was ours. We had our ups and downs, but I never thought there was anything we couldn't handle. We weren't the type to fawn over each other constantly, and sure, we had our fights. But in the end, we'd always come back together. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I realize I was just another clueless husband who believed everything would work out as long as we kept going. And then there's Derek, my so-called best friend. We've known each other for nearly 20 years, ever since we worked together back in the day. The guy's been through hell. About a decade ago, he lost his wife in a car accident. It broke him. Left him with his daughter, Chloe, who was just 10 years old at the time. That first year, Derek was barely functioning, and Laura and I were there for him every step of the way. Especially Laura. She took on this almost motherly role with Chloe, like she was trying to fill the void Derek's wife had left behind. Chloe practically grew up in our house. She was there all the time, calling me Uncle Ethan. Over the years, she started confiding in me about things she didn't feel comfortable telling her dad. You know how teenagers are. Sometimes they'd rather open up to anyone other than their parents. I thought of her like a little sister, and she probably saw me as more of an older brother. We talked about boys, school, and all the usual teenage stuff. Derek seemed to appreciate it, or at least I thought he did. Derek and Chloe were practically family. They lived nearby, so they'd stop by all the time. Derek especially. He'd drop in unannounced like it was his second home. Felt normal. He was part of our lives, almost like he belonged there. But what I didn't know was that this familiarity, the kind you think is safe, would turn into something so much darker. The day everything unraveled was a day I wasn't even supposed to be home. I'd been at work, grinding through the usual, when this sudden, sharp pain in my stomach hit me. My boss, being a decent guy, told me to head home and rest. I figured I'd crawl into bed and sleep it off. But that's not what happened. I didn't even make it to my bed. When I pulled into the driveway, Derek's car was there. At first, it didn't seem strange. He often parked there when he came by to chat or have a drink. But this time, something felt off. Call it a gut feeling, intuition, whatever you want. I just knew something wasn't right. Then I noticed the front door was locked. That was weird. Laura never locked the door during the day, especially if we had company. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where locking the door during the day wasn't something anyone really did. So why now? I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and that's when it hit me. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And then I heard it, soft at first, but unmistakable. Moaning. Gasps. Muffled words. My heart felt like it stopped. No, this couldn't be real. Not this. But the sounds were there, and there was no denying what they meant. I didn't think. My legs moved on their own, carrying me upstairs faster than my brain could catch up. Each step felt like I was walking deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. On the way up, I grabbed the bat from the hall closet. I wasn't just walking into that room, I was marching straight into hell. When I reached the bedroom door, I knew someone was about to pay for this. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Then I pushed the door open. I wasn't ready for what I saw. There she was, my wife of 16 years, straddling my so-called best friend. They froze mid-motion, their eyes locking onto me as if I were a ghost. The color drained from their faces. Laura's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Derek scrambled off the bed like a scared rat, his movements clumsy and desperate. I didn't say a thing. I just walked toward him, gripping the bat tighter, and swung it down hard against the floor. The sound of wood cracking echoed through the room. Derek flinched, his hands coming up in a pathetic attempt to shield himself. But I wasn't aiming for him. Not yet. I didn't need to say a word. The guilt and betrayal were written all over their faces. Laura, always the manipulator, was the first to find her voice. "Ethan, wait. Don't do anything stupid. Please, let's talk." Talk? Talk? After this, I dropped the bat to the floor with a loud clatter and swung my fist into Derek's face. Once, then again. The third punch split his lip, blood trailing down his chin in a slow, crimson stream. Laura screamed, her hands clawing at me, trying to pull me away from him. "Stop, Ethan. Stop!" she cried, but I was too far gone to care. Derek finally managed to sputter something, his eyes wide with panic. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," I growled, my voice trembling with rage. "How long?" My words were low but sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "How long has this been going on?" Neither of them answered. They just stared at me, useless and pathetic. I didn't wait for their excuses. I couldn't stomach it. I grabbed the bat, stormed out of the room, and headed straight for the driveway. Derek's car was parked there, just waiting for me. Without a second thought, I swung the bat at the windshield, shattering it with a single blow. I dented the hood, smashed the side mirrors, and let out all the fury I couldn't contain. The whole time, one thought kept spinning in my head. How the hell did it come to this? I got into my own car and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just needed to get away. But then it hit me, I needed a drink. No, I needed to get hammered. So I drove to the bar. The one place that always seemed to make sense, where the chaos of the world didn't feel so heavy. When I walked in, I was still clutching the bat, my knuckles white around the handle. It felt like my last line of defense against the wreckage my life had become. The regulars were there, scattered around the room, nursing their drinks and minding their own problems. But I could feel their eyes on me the second I walked in. I must have looked like hell. A man who just walked straight off a battlefield. I didn't say a word as I sat at the counter. I didn't have to. "Whiskey?" I muttered, not even glancing up at the bartender. Frank was his name, a good guy who'd been working there for as long as I could remember. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. He just poured the whiskey and set the glass in front of me. I downed it in one gulp. The burn in my throat was barely a flicker compared to the fire raging inside me. By the time I ordered my third glass, Frank leaned in a little, his brow raised. "Everything okay, Ethan? It's not like you to show up here before the sun's down." His voice was calm, steady, like he'd heard 1,000 stories just as bad, or worse, than mine. But there was concern there, too. Nobody had ever seen me like this before. Not in all the years I'd been coming to that bar. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that felt more like a bark. "You ever walk in on your wife screwing your best friend?" Frank's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look surprised, like he'd seen it all. "Damn," he muttered, letting out a low whistle. "That's rough, man. Rough doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. The amber liquid caught the light as I stared at it, hoping stupidly that it might hold some kind of answer. But it didn't. Nothing did. I don't know why I told him everything. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe I just needed to get it out before it consumed me completely. But I told him. Every single detail. I told him about walking in on them, the way they looked at me, the sound of the bat cracking against the floor. I told Frank about smashing Derek's car, about the punches, and how it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. He listened, never interrupting, just letting me spill it all. When I finally finished, he gave me a heavy pat on the shoulder. It was firm but oddly comforting. "That's a shitty situation, man," he said, his voice steady. No other way to put it. I nodded, staring at the empty glass in front of me. Shitty didn't even begin to cover it. "But listen," Frank said, leaning in closer, his voice lowering slightly. "The main thing here is not to break down. Don't let them win." I looked at him, his words hitting me harder than I expected. What would you do if you were me? I asked, my voice hoarse from the alcohol and anger. Frank didn't hesitate. Me? Well, I'd probably do what you're doing now. Get drunk off my ass, maybe break something. Hell, let's make that official. He grabbed a glass, poured himself a whiskey, and clinked it against mine. To shitty friends and cheating wives. I smirked at that, the first real emotion I'd felt all day. We both downed our drinks in one go, the burn barely noticeable anymore. But then Frank set his glass down with a loud thud and leaned in even closer, his tone darker now. After that, I'd want revenge. The kind that leaves them with nothing. Take everything from them, your wife, your so-called best friend. Make them regret the day they ever crossed you. His words struck a chord deep inside me. Revenge. That's what I wanted, wasn't it? To see them suffer. To tear apart their lives the way they'd torn apart mine. I felt a fire ignite in me. A clarity I hadn't had all day. I'll do it, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm going to take them down. Leave them with nothing. Frank nodded in approval but softened just slightly. Be smart about it, Ethan. You're a good guy. Don't let this turn you into something you're not. The hours blurred after that. I drank until I couldn't see straight, drowning in the haze of whiskey and rage. I had no idea how I was going to get home, and honestly, I didn't care. Frank must have seen it all before. Before I could even think about stumbling out to my car, he reached across the counter and snatched my keys. You're not driving anywhere, Ethan. Pick these up when you're sober. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth was, I was in no condition to fight. I just nodded and slumped back onto the stool. Taxi's on the way, Frank said, already dialing. When the cab showed up, I barely managed to make it into the back seat without falling over. The driver didn't say a word, thank God, and just drove. I stared out the window the whole ride, the city blurring by like it wasn't even real. I don't remember much after that. I stumbled through the front door of my house, the place where it all started. The place that now felt empty, like a hollow shell of the life I used to have. I collapsed onto the couch, still fully dressed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover of my life. My head felt like it had been run over by a truck, my mouth was bone dry, and every muscle in my body ached. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the gnawing, bitter realization that everything had changed. By the time I crawled off the couch that afternoon, my head was still pounding, but I didn't have time to wallow in it. I knew what I had to do next. The divorce wasn't going to happen on its own. I grabbed my phone and called the first divorce lawyer I could think of. Alan, a guy I'd met a few years back at a work event. We talked here and there, and I knew he specialized in messy situations like mine. Alan, it's Ethan. I need to talk about a divorce, I said flatly, skipping any pleasantries. Damn, Ethan, Alan said, his voice a mix of surprise and sympathy. Didn't expect this call from you. All right, give me the rundown. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. Laura, the infidelity, how long we'd been married. If I was going to make sure she didn't walk away with a damn thing, Alan needed to know it all. When I finally hung up, I felt better. Just a little. Like I'd taken the first step toward clawing my life back. That's when I saw it, Laura's laptop, sitting on the dining room table. Her work laptop. She had a big presentation the next day, something she'd been stressing about for weeks. She'd been going on and on about how it could make or break her career. And then it hit me. A way to make her life just a little harder. I sat down and opened the laptop, scrolling through her files until I found the presentation. I wasn't exactly a tech genius, but I knew enough to cause some damage. As I skimmed through the slides, an idea started forming. Laura's meeting was with executives from a Korean company. I did a quick Google search and found a few offensive phrases that would definitely rub those executives the wrong way. Subtle enough to slip under the radar at first, but guaranteed to cause some serious awkwardness when they were noticed. I inserted them right into the middle of Laura's presentation, buried just deep enough that they wouldn't show up in a quick skim. Then, for good measure, I added a few inappropriate images. Nothing too blatant, just placed far enough into the slides to catch her completely off guard during her big moment. This wasn't just about ending our marriage. I was going to make sure her life took a hit, too. The throbbing in my head was still unbearable, so I popped a couple of painkillers and stretched out on the couch. By the time evening rolled around, I felt better. Just in time for Laura to walk through the door like nothing had happened. She looked calm. Too calm. Like she thought she could charm or manipulate her way out of this mess the way she always did. "Ethan, we need to talk," she started. Her voice cool but carrying that sharp edge I'd grown to hate over the years. I didn't even bother looking at her. "Go to hell, Laura. We're getting a divorce." She didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms and spat back, "You're a fool." Her tone was dripping with arrogance, as if she thought I'd cool off after a while. Like this was just some petty spat over dinner plans or money. "We'll see who the fool is," I snapped, standing up and heading out to the porch. I didn't have anywhere to go, but I needed space. The house was big enough for the two of us, but that night it felt suffocating, like a prison. There was no way in hell I was going to sleep next to her, so I figured I'd crash on the couch again. As it turned out, I didn't even make it through the night at home. A few hours past midnight, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was another spam call, but then I saw the name on the screen. Chloe, Derek's daughter. I answered groggily. "Hello." At first, her words were slurred and jumbled, but it didn't take long for me to figure out what was going on. Chloe was drunk. Very drunk. She'd been at some party and couldn't get home. She didn't want Derek to find out, and I guess she thought I was the only one she could trust. I sighed, got dressed, grabbed my keys and headed out. When I arrived at the address she'd given me, Chloe was leaning against a wall, barely able to stand. The smell of alcohol hit me before she even got close. She stumbled toward the car, and I opened the door for her. She practically fell into the passenger seat. "What the hell, Chloe?" I said, more concerned than angry. "This isn't like you." She waved me off, her head lolling against the seat. "My boyfriend, he cheated on me," she mumbled, her voice trembling as she teetered on the edge of crying. Despite her drunken, disoriented state, she had this strange smile on her face, like she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It hit me then, a pang of sympathy I didn't expect. I knew exactly what that felt like. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. She turned toward me, her drunken curiosity suddenly piqued. "Who else?" I sighed, then gave her a short, watered-down version of what had happened with Laura and Derek. I didn't go into the ugly details, but it was enough for her to get the picture. "Oh, Uncle Ethan," she whispered, leaning closer. Her hand landed on my leg, and her voice softened. "I'm so sorry." At first, I thought she was just trying to comfort me, but her hand didn't stop there. Started moving slowly up and down my leg. My whole body tensed. "Chloe, stop," I said firmly, taking her hand and moving it away. But she didn't stop. Her hand wandered back to my thigh, her intentions becoming clearer. Her drunken flirtation was impossible to ignore now. "I want to make you feel better," she whispered, her voice low and slurred. As her hand continued its wayward path, I resisted, I really did. But the anger, the betrayal, the alcohol, they all collided in that moment. My judgment was clouded, my resolve weakened. At some point, I stopped caring. Maybe it was the revenge talking. Maybe it was just the whiskey. I don't know. But when she unzipped my fly and bent down, I didn't stop her. For a while, I wasn't thinking about Derek or Laura anymore. There was just the moment. A fleeting, twisted sense of satisfaction that came from crossing a line I could never uncross. When she was done, she leaned back and smiled, her lipstick smeared and her makeup a mess. "There's a hotel nearby," she said, her voice still dripping with drunken suggestion. "You don't want to go home, and neither do I." I didn't argue. I drove us to the hotel, where we spent the rest of the night together, doing things I never thought I'd be capable of. I was 44, but that night, age didn't seem to matter. Somehow I kept up. In the morning, she woke me up with a grin. "Let's take a picture," she said, grabbing my phone since hers was dead. I don't know why, but I let her take the picture. Chloe posed, her makeup smeared across her face, with that wild, reckless grin. I snapped the photo, her lipstick still staining my skin as evidence of what we'd done. Afterward, we fell back into bed. By the time morning came and the hangover hit me like a freight train, reality crashed down hard. I didn't regret it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line I could never come back from. Things were only going to get messier from here. When we stepped out of the hotel into the harsh morning light, everything felt surreal. It was the kind of crisp, clear morning where the world should feel normal, but it didn't. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a storm cloud. Chloe was the first to break the silence. She lit a cigarette, blowing out a long stream of smoke, completely unbothered. "You know," she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather, "you could show that picture to my dad." I froze mid-step and stared at her. "What?" She took another drag, looking at me with a sideways grin that didn't match the seriousness of what she was saying. "I mean it. You could show him that picture of me. I don't give a anymore." "Why the hell would you want me to do that?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. Chloe shrugged, her grin widening like it was all some twisted game. "I've been trying to get away from him for years, but he won't let me go. Every time I mention moving out or living my own life, he throws the whole 'you won't survive without me' speech at me. I'm so sick of it. Maybe if he sees the picture, he'll finally get it. Maybe he'll let me go."
Ist daher stumped?
Her words hit me like a ballon to the chest. This wasn't some bratty rebellion or teenage tantrum. This was years of being trapped under Derek's thumb, suffocated by a father who wouldn't let her breathe. She was willing to use me, willing to use what we'd done, to blow her life apart just to escape. "I'm not going to do that," I said, my voice firm. But the truth was, the thought had already crossed my mind. It was one more way to stick it to Derek. One more way to burn everything down. Chloe flicked her cigarette but into the gutter, shrugging like she didn't care either way. "Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." I drove her home, the car filled with silence, her words still echoing in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about the picture. Her smeared makeup, her lipstick on my skin. It was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to blow everything apart. And part of me wanted it. I wanted the explosion. I wanted to leave nothing but ashes behind. When I got home, the tension hit me before I even walked through the door. Laura's laptop was still sitting on the dining room table, a silent reminder of the chaos I'd set in motion. She had no idea what was coming. That presentation she'd been obsessing over for weeks, the one she'd pinned her career on, was now a disaster waiting to happen. I didn't have to wait long. Laura came home just before dinner, slamming the door so hard it rattled the pictures on the walls. She didn't even look at me. Her face was twisted in pure, unfiltered rage. Before I could say a word, she grabbed the laptop and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into pieces as it hit the floor. "You idiot!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fury. "You did this, didn't you?" I didn't move from the couch. I just stared at her with a calmness I didn't really feel. "Maybe," I said flatly. She stormed across the room, her face red and her eyes wild. "You sabotaged my presentation, didn't you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I didn't even flinch. "Yeah, I know exactly what I've done." Her hands were trembling, and for a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. "They fired me, Ethan!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "I got fired in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what that means? No company is going to touch me now. I'm finished." I raised an eyebrow. "Good." Her scream was a mix of rage and desperation. She grabbed the back of a chair and threw it across the room, the sound of it crashing barely registering to me. "You ruined me," she shouted. "You've ruined everything. And for what? To get back at me? Well, you, Ethan. Because guess what? I've been Derek for years. We didn't even wait after his wife's funeral. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd expected betrayal, but this? The fact that they'd started right after his wife's funeral? It was cruelty on a level I couldn't comprehend. My stomach twisted, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. How the hell had I been so blind, so stupid, for so long? They'd been screwing each other while I sat there grieving with him, supporting him through the loss of his wife. And the entire time, they were betraying me behind my back. The thought of it made my fists clench so tightly I thought I might break something. "Go to hell, Laura," I growled, my voice low and cold. She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door so hard the walls shook. And just like that, she was gone from my life, at least for the moment. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I sat back down on the couch, my mind still spinning from everything that had happened. That's when I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over the photo of Chloe for just a moment, the one with her disheveled makeup and that unmistakable look on her face. Then, without a second thought, I hit send. The image was now on its way to Derek. A final, damning nail in the coffin. I didn't care what came next. I just wanted him to feel the ethane gut-wrenching pain, the ethane betrayal, the ethane chaos that had consumed my life. 15 minutes later, Derek's car screeched to a halt outside my house. He didn't even bother knocking. The door flew open, and he stormed in like a man possessed. His face was twisted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "What the sir is this, Ethan?" he shouted, holding up his phone, the picture of his daughter staring back at me. I didn't even stand up. I just looked him dead in the eye. "What the do you think it is?" I said, my voice calm but razor-sharp. That's when he lunged. His fist connected with my jaw, sending me staggering back. But I wasn't about to take it lying down. I swung back, and within seconds, we were both crashing into the coffee table, fists flying. It wasn't clean or choreographed like in the movies. This was raw, primal, ugly. Two broken men, consumed by betrayal, trying to hurt each other in the only way we knew how. At some point, we ended up on the floor, exhausted, bloodied, and bruised. We lay there panting, staring up at the ceiling like two battered dogs who'd fought to a standstill. Neither of us said a word. What was there to say? We'd both destroyed our lives in different ways, and now we were left lying in the ruins. That's when I heard the sirens. 10 minutes later, the cops broke down the door. One of the neighbors must have seen us through the window, throwing punches, and decided to call it in. They separated us, dragging us to our feet and out to the patrol cars. I spent a few hours at the station, sitting in silence. Neither of us pressed charges. We were too tired, too worn out to keep the fight going. Eventually, they let us go with nothing more than a warning. When I got home that night, something strange settled over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt lighter. Not better exactly, but different. Like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. I didn't care about Laura, Derek, or even Chloe anymore. They could all go to hell, for all I cared. In the end, maybe I was the one who burned everything down, but after everything that had happened, I was okay with that. Sometimes, the only way to survive is to burn it all and walk away from the ashes. Laura and I split faster than I expected. After all the chaos, there wasn't much left to salvage. No love, no trust. Just a hollow shell of what our marriage used to be. It was like watching a building burn to the ground and realizing halfway through the fire that there wasn't anything worth saving. We signed the papers, divided up the assets, and went our separate ways. A few months later, we sold the house. That place used to mean everything. Our home, where we'd planned our future, argued over stupid things, and even made some good memories once upon a time. But after everything that happened, it felt more like a tomb. The walls echoed with arguments, betrayal, and that final, ugly collapse. I was relieved when it sold. It meant I could finally close that chapter and move on. Laura and I both moved to different places. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Felt like a fresh start, something I could control. I didn't care where Laura went, as long as it was far away. That was enough for me. I didn't have to worry about running into her at the grocery store or any of the places we used to frequent. We needed distance, and now we had it. Chloe surprised me, though. After everything, she took charge of her life. She moved out of her dad's house, got a good job in another city, and started building a life for herself. In a strange way, I was proud of her. We still talk sometimes, Just casual conversations, nothing heavy. She checks in on me every once in a while and I do the ethane. It's weird, though. We haven't seen each other in person since that night at the hotel. I think we both know it's for the best. I never intended to keep that thing with Chloe going. Whatever happened between us that night was a one-time mistake, fueled by anger, alcohol, and the desperate need to escape. We both needed something to numb the pain, but I wasn't about to turn it into anything more. Some things are better left in the past. Laura, on the other hand, didn't land on her feet quite so gracefully. The fallout from her botched presentation spread like wildfire. Word traveled fast in her industry, and no one wanted to take a chance on her after that. Getting fired was bad enough, but the rumors and whispers about what happened in that boardroom, they left her blacklisted. She tried to find work, bouncing from one opportunity to the next, but nothing stuck. No one wanted to hire someone who had humiliated herself in front of a room full of executives. What really got under my skin was hearing about her and Derek. After everything blew up, they actually tried to make it work. Maybe they figured that since they'd already destroyed their marriages, there was nothing left to lose. But the thing about relationships built on lies, they don't last. The spark they had while sneaking around behind my back burned out fast when they had to face each other in the harsh light of day. From what I heard, things went downhill quickly. They started drinking a lot. It became their nightly routine, a toxic cycle of booze and bitterness. I guess they thought alcohol could dull the edges of their regret, but all it did was sharpen the resentment. When you drink to drown your problems, the only thing you end up drowning is yourself. It didn't take long for their relationship to implode. A mutual acquaintance told me it all came to a head one night. They had a fight, nastier than usual. Derek hit her. Bad enough that she ended up in the hospital and he wound up in jail. I don't know if she pressed charges, and honestly, I didn't care enough to find out. They got what was coming to them one way or another. As for me, life started to look up. It wasn't some fairy tale transformation, and it didn't happen overnight. But little by little, things got better. I've always been the kind of guy who thought I could handle everything on my own, that I didn't need anyone's help. But after everything that happened, I realized I couldn't carry all that weight by myself. The anger, the betrayal, the guilt, it was like poison, eating me alive from the inside out. So, I swallowed my pride and started seeing a psychologist. It wasn't easy at first. Sitting there, spilling my guts to a stranger who didn't know me, didn't know what I'd been through. It felt awkward, even painful. But after a few sessions, I started to see how much I needed it. I needed someone to help me unpack all the undersur. I'd buried so deep, I didn't even know I was carrying it. It was like lifting a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me. I also found myself back at the bar more often. Frank, the bartender, had been there for me from the start, even if he didn't know the whole story. One night, after a couple of drinks, I finally told him everything. About Laura and Derek. About Chloe. The picture. The fight. All of it. I expected him to judge me, to look at me like I was some kind of monster. But he didn't. He just listened, nodding along like he'd heard it all before. When I got to the part about sending Derek the picture of Chloe, Frank let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Man," he said, pouring us both a shot of whiskey. "That's one hell of a story." We clinked glasses and drank. And after that, we laughed. Not because any of it was funny, it wasn't. But sometimes you laugh because the alternative is letting it crush you. Looking back, I've wondered more than once if I did the right thing. Was all that revenge worth it? Did it fix anything? No, probably not. But it gave me closure, in a way I didn't think I'd ever find. Laura and Derek got what they deserved. Chloe found her own way out. And me? I'm still standing. So, to anyone who's stuck around to read this, thanks. I needed to get it all off my chest, to lay it all out there from start to finish. Life's messy, unpredictable, cruel even, but you deal with it. You keep moving forward. And if you're lucky, you learn something along the way. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But in the end, I'm still here. I'm still moving forward. And that's got to count for something, right? Good luck out there, folks. Life's a undersur. But sometimes you just have to laugh and keep going.